Story 1. The Delivery Driver. Being a delivery driver had never scared me. I had driven through hundreds of streets and neighborhoods, from quiet areas to more dangerous ones, and I always believed I could handle any situation. After all, the city was mine. I knew every curve, every alley, every traffic light. But that night was different. That night, something else was with me. It had been a normal day. The traffic, as always, was hellish, but I had already delivered almost all the packages. The clock read 7 p.m., and although it was late, I only had a couple of deliveries left before heading back to the base. All I had on my mind was getting home and resting, but something made me uncomfortable. It was that feeling that raises the hairs on the back of your neck for no apparent reason, an inexplicable chill that you can't ignore. After delivering a package to a quiet house, I noticed a black car behind me, a little closer than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars followed me all the time while I made my deliveries. But as I continued, that same black car kept following me, maintaining the exact distance, turning when I turned, slowing down when I did. Something wasn't right. I had been playing this game of follow the leader for almost 5 minutes. My heart began to race. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence, that there was no reason to worry. But with each turn I made, with each street I took, the car stayed behind me, mirroring my movements. Finally, I reached my next delivery. It was an apartment building at the end of a narrow street. I had to make the delivery at the back of the building, in a dead-end alley that connected to a small parking lot. I drove there, hoping the black car would leave, but it didn't. I pulled into the parking lot, got out of the van, and made sure the package was in order. When I looked back, I saw it. The black car was parked at the entrance of the alley, motionless. Its lights were off, but I could feel the driver's eyes on me. A chill ran down my spine. I knew something was wrong. I delivered the package as quickly as I could, trying to ignore the fear creeping up on me. But when I returned to my van, the car was still there. What the hell was going on? I got in, started the engine, and began to back up. As I approached the black car, its headlights flashed on, momentarily blinding me. I stopped, my heart pounding in my ears. Seconds felt like hours. I was trapped. The car was blocking the only way out of the alley. At that moment, 2 of the car's doors opened, and I saw 2 figures get out. They were big, burly men. One of them was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't make out what it was. I just knew it wasn't anything good. Panic overtook me. There was no time to think, only to act. I turned the wheel and hit the gas, swerving sharply to the left to escape through the other side of the alley. My van wobbled, the tires screeched, and I felt the impact of something hitting the back of the vehicle. The men had tried to catch me, but I was already out. I sped through the deserted streets without looking back. I didn't know if the black car was chasing me, but I couldn't stop. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and all I wanted was to reach a busier street, a place with people, lights, life. Finally, I reached a main avenue, filled with traffic and neon lights. I stopped at a red light, gasping for air, my hands trembling on the wheel. I glanced in the rear-view mirror, expecting to see the black car behind me, but it wasn't there. It had disappeared. The relief was immediate but short-lived. I knew I had to finish my route, but the fear remained, lingering. I checked my surroundings over and over as I made my final deliveries, making sure no one was following me. Luckily, everything seemed normal. At last, I finished my shift. When I returned to the distribution center, my supervisor noticed something was off. I told him what had happened, not leaving out any details. They decided to check the security cameras in the area where the incident had occurred and called the police. A few days later, I received a call. The police had arrested 2 men who were linked to several armed robberies in the city. They were the same men who had followed me that night. Although the police never found out exactly what they had planned for me, the fact that they were armed and had chased me left no room for doubt. I felt relieved, but the fear never truly left. The thought that someone could have harmed me, that I had been hunted like prey in the middle of the night, kept haunting me. After that experience, I stopped doing nighttime deliveries. I couldn't shake the feeling that, somewhere in the city, someone else might be waiting in the shadows. Since that night, every time I sit alone in my van, especially when it's dark, I can't help but glance at the rearview mirror. I look for that black car, and even though I haven't seen it again, the fear that it might return is always there. Because once you've been followed, once you've felt that terror, you're never the same. Story 2. Black Witchcraft. I never believed in black magic. In fact, I used to laugh at the idea that someone could influence another person's life through spells or curses. But that was before everything started falling apart. Before I became the victim of something I couldn't explain, something dark that changed everything. It began during my time at university. I had a bright future ahead of me. My grades were excellent. I had a great group of friends, and even secured a part-time job that gave me a decent income. Things seemed perfect, or at least as perfect as they could be for a young guy in college. But there was one person who changed all of that. A classmate whose presence I didn't even pay much attention to at first. Her name was Isabel. She wasn't anyone special, just another face in the crowd. But for some reason, she didn't like me. I couldn't figure out why. She always gave me these cold, hateful looks whenever we crossed paths, and whenever I tried to speak to her. She brushed me off or made snide comments under her breath. I chalked it up to personality differences. Not everyone gets along, right? But I never expected what would come next. Over time, her dislike of me became more obvious, almost hostile. She started spreading rumors about me, saying things to my friends that made them distance themselves from me. It was subtle at first, small lies that planted seeds of doubt, but it grew worse. I began losing friends. People I had known for years stopped talking to me, stopped sitting with me in class. They wouldn't even look me in the eye. I had no idea what was going on, and it left me confused and frustrated. Then, my grades started slipping. No matter how hard I studied, I couldn't focus. It was like my mind was in a fog, constantly distracted, constantly worrying. I would sit in front of my books for hours, but the information wouldn't stick. I'd failed tests I should have aced. My professors noticed a change in my performance, and even asked if everything was okay. I lied, saying I was just going through a rough patch. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't explain it. Things got worse when I started losing opportunities at work. I was passed over for promotions. My tasks suddenly became harder, and I started making mistakes I never would have made before. It was like the universe was conspiring against me. The harder I tried, the more I failed. And that's when I started having nightmares. Every night, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, after seeing the same vision. A shadowy figure with glowing eyes and a twisted smile, watching me from the corner of my room. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just lay there, paralyzed, as this thing stared into my soul. And then, just as I was about to break, I'd wake up. At first, I thought it was just stress, but then strange things started happening in real life. I'd see flickers of movement out of the corner of my eye, dark shapes that would vanish as soon as I turned my head. Objects would move in my room, things I knew I hadn't touched. The air would feel heavy, oppressive, like something was pressing down on me. I started avoiding my own apartment, staying out late just to avoid going home. But even outside, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, followed by something unseen. One night, I visited my aunt, who was known for her connection to spiritual practices. I hadn't told anyone about what was happening, but she took one look at me and said, "Something dark is hanging over you." Her words sent chills down my spine. She urged me to go with her to a spiritual healer she trusted. Desperate, I agreed. When we arrived, the healer, an older woman with sharp, penetrating eyes, examined me without touching me. She walked around me, muttering prayers and burning incense. Finally, she spoke, confirming my worst fears. "You've been cursed," she said. Someone has placed a spell on you to ruin your life. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe it, but at the same time, everything made sense. The strange things, the bad luck, the nightmares, it all pointed to something beyond the physical world. The healer said the curse was powerful and that removing it wouldn't be easy. She explained that the person who had cast the spell, Isabel, had used black magic to destroy my friendships, my career, my peace of mind. It was revenge, she said, but for what? I still didn't understand why she hated me so much. The healer offered to perform a ritual to break the curse, but it would come at a cost, a high one, both financially and emotionally. I didn't care. I wanted my life back, wanted to be free of whatever darkness had attached itself to me. So I agreed. The ritual was intense. It lasted hours with candles, prayers, and strange symbols drawn on the floor. The entire time, I could feel the presence of something watching, resisting, as if it didn't want to let me go. But by the end of the night, the healer assured me that the curse had been weakened. It would take time, she said, but things would slowly get better. And they did. My focus started returning. My nightmares lessened, and my life began to stabilize. But I was never the same. The experience left scars, emotional and mental, that I still carry today. I'm cautious now, always wary of the people I allow into my life, always watching for signs of something darker lurking in the shadows. As for Isabel, I never confronted her. She disappeared from the university not long after the ritual, transferring to another school. I don't know where she is now, and I don't care to find out, but the fear remains. The fear that, even after everything, the darkness she brought into my life might still be out there, waiting for another chance to strike. And now, I can't help but believe in black magic, because once you've experienced it, once you've been its victim, you understand how real it truly is. Story 3. The Apartment and the Man with the Hat. I've always considered myself a rational person. I don't believe in ghosts, paranormal activity, or any of that stuff. But what happened to me at work a few years ago still gives me chills to this day. It was something I can't explain, no matter how much I've tried to make sense of it. I used to work as a maintenance technician in a large apartment building in the city. It wasn't the best job, but it paid the bills, and most of the time, the work was straightforward. Fix a leaky faucet here. Replace some broken tiles there. Easy stuff. The building itself was old, built in the early 1900s, and over time, I became familiar with all its creaks and groans, especially during the night shift. The place always had a bit of an eerie vibe, especially when you were alone. One night, I was assigned the late shift, covering for a colleague. It was a slow evening, nothing out of the ordinary. I was in the basement, working on an issue with the building's heating system. The basement was always the creepiest part of the building, dark, damp, with flickering lights that never seemed to stay on for long. But I'd been down there so many times, I'd gotten used to it. As I was finishing up, I heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. At first, I didn't think much of it. Tenants sometimes came down to the basement to check on their storage units or grab something from the laundry room. But the footsteps didn't sound normal. They were slow, deliberate, almost as if someone was dragging their feet. I stopped what I was doing and looked down the dimly lit corridor. That's when I saw him. At the far end of the hallway, standing completely still, was a man. He was tall, wearing a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. The brim cast a shadow over his face, making it impossible to see his features clearly, but I could feel him watching me. There was something off about him. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just stood there, like a statue. "Hey!" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty basement. "You need something?" No response. The man didn't move. He just stood there, completely still. I felt a wave of unease wash over me. Something about this man didn't feel right. I'd seen all kinds of people in this building, but none of them ever gave me a feeling like this before. My mind started racing. Who was he? What was he doing down here? I took a few steps forward, my hand instinctively tightening around the wrench I'd been using to fix the pipes. "You're not supposed to be down here," I said, my voice a little more forceful this time. Still nothing. Then, without warning, the man turned and walked into one of the side corridors. His movements were slow and deliberate, but he disappeared from view in an instant. Something about the way he moved sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if he wasn't in a hurry, but also as if he knew exactly where he was going. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the best of me. I had to see where he went. I hurried down the hallway and turned the corner into the side corridor where he had vanished. But when I got there, the corridor was empty. There were no doors, no exits, no place for anyone to hide. It was just a dead-end hallway with nothing but pipes running along the ceiling. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I had just seen him. There was no way he could have disappeared that quickly. It didn't make any sense. I searched the entire basement, checking every corner, every nook and cranny, but the man was gone. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I went back to my workstation, shaken but trying to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was the dim lighting, or maybe I had just imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had seen him. He was real. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak, every shadow made me jump. It was as if the basement itself had taken on a life of its own, the air thick with tension. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man standing there again, watching me from the shadows. When my shift finally ended, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I didn't even tell anyone what I had seen. Who would believe me, anyway? A tall man in a hat who disappears into thin air? It sounded crazy, even to me. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing stories from some of the tenants about strange sightings in the building. People would talk about seeing a tall man in a hat late at night, standing in the hallways or at the end of dark corridors. Some said he would vanish if you got too close, while others claimed he would just stand there, watching. Everyone brushed it off as a ghost story, just rumors that had spread over time. But I knew what I had seen. One night, a few months later, I was talking to one of the older tenants in the building. He had lived there for decades and knew more about the place than anyone else. I asked him if he had ever heard of the man with the hat. He looked at me, his face suddenly serious. "Yeah, I've heard of him," he said quietly. "They say he's been around since the building was first constructed. Some people think he's the spirit of one of the workers who died during the construction. Others say he was a tenant who disappeared mysteriously." I felt a chill run down my spine. Whoever, or whatever, that man was, I knew one thing. I wasn't the only one who had seen him. To this day, I still don't know what I encountered in that basement. I left the job not long after that, but I can't forget what happened. Every time I think about it, I can still see that tall, shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway, watching me. Story 4. The attack in the apartment. I never thought it would happen to me. You always hear stories about people being attacked in their own homes, but you never think you'll be the one telling that story. I guess I was naive. I had lived in the same apartment for almost 2 years, and nothing bad had ever happened. It was a nice building in a decent part of town, and I always felt safe. That was until one night changed everything. It was a Friday night, and I had just gotten home from work. The day had been long and stressful, so all I wanted to do was relax. I kicked off my shoes, grabbed a drink, and settled in on the couch to watch some TV. The building was unusually quiet that evening, almost eerily so, but I didn't think much of it. Sometimes it was like that. Around 10 p.m., I started to feel a bit restless, so I decided to head to bed early. As I brushed my teeth and got ready for bed, I heard a faint sound. At first, I thought it was the neighbors, thin walls and all, but then I realized it was coming from outside my door. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth in the hallway. I froze for a moment, toothbrush in hand, listening. The footsteps stopped, and then there was a soft knock at my door. It wasn't the typical knock you'd expect from a neighbor asking to borrow something or someone delivering a package. It was soft, almost hesitant, like whoever was on the other side didn't want to be heard. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was late, and I lived alone. I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I crept closer and peered through the peephole. At first, I didn't see anything. The hallway lights were dim, casting long shadows on the floor. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw a figure standing just out of view, to the side of the doorframe. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. "Who's there?" No response. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Something didn't feel right. I thought about calling the building's security, but before I could reach for my phone, there was another knock. This one was louder, more urgent. My instincts were screaming at me to stay away from the door, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped back to the peephole and looked again. This time, there were two of them. Two men, standing in the hallway, just a few feet from my door. One was tall and broad, wearing a hoodie pulled up over his head. The other was shorter, stocky, with a scruffy beard. Both of them were staring directly at the door, as if they knew I was watching. My breath caught in my throat. I knew I was in danger. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I call the police? Should I shout for help? But the building was so quiet, I doubted anyone would hear me. Before I could act, the taller man reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a crowbar. I watched in horror as he gripped it tightly, his knuckles turning white. He nodded to the other man, and that's when they both lunged toward the door, slamming their bodies against it with enough force to make the entire frame shake. Panic surged through me. They were trying to break in. I stumbled back, grabbing my phone off the table as I backed away from the door. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely dial 911. The operator answered, and I tried to explain what was happening, but my voice was trembling, and I could barely get the words out. "They're trying to break in. Two men, they've got a crowbar." I managed to stammer. The operator told me to stay on the line, that help was on the way, but I couldn't wait. I knew it would only be a matter of minutes before they broke through. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to think of a way out. The window? But I was on the second floor. Jumping wouldn't be a good idea. I was trapped. The sound of wood splintering filled the apartment. They were inside. I could hear their heavy footsteps stomping through the living room, moving closer and closer to the bedroom. My mind raced. What could I do? I wasn't armed. I had nothing to protect myself with. Suddenly, I remembered something. In the closet, I had an old baseball bat. It wasn't much, but it was something. I grabbed it, holding it tightly in my hands, and positioned myself behind the bedroom door. If they came in, I'd have no choice but to defend myself. Seconds felt like hours as I waited, listening to their footsteps drawing nearer. They stopped right outside the bedroom door. My grip tightened on the bat. I could hear them whispering to each other, and then the doorknob rattled. I held my breath. The door creaked open, just a crack, and I prepared myself to swing. But before they could enter, I heard the sound of sirens wailing in the distance. They must have heard it too, because suddenly, the door slammed shut and their footsteps pounded down the hallway. I stayed frozen in place, bat still raised, until I was sure they were gone. A few moments later, I heard the police banging on the front door, shouting for me to open up. I rushed out of the bedroom, to open the door, and collapsed into the arms of the officers. They searched the apartment and the building, but the men were gone. They had disappeared into the night, leaving behind a broken door and a shaken sense of security. I never found out who they were or why they targeted me, but from that night on, I never felt safe in that apartment again. I moved out a few months later, but the memory of that night still haunts me. Every time I hear a knock at the door, I can't help but remember those two men and how close I came to losing everything. History 5. The Man in the University. I never believed in curses or black magic. That kind of thing felt like folklore, something you'd read about or see in movies. But my time at university changed all of that. I became the target of something dark, something I still don't fully understand. It all started in my first year. I was a pretty normal guy, focused on my studies, friendly with my classmates, and excited about the future. Everything was going smoothly. I'd made a solid group of friends, and my grades were top-notch. But all of that began to unravel after I met her. Her name was Clara. At first, I didn't pay much attention to her. She was just another student in the same lecture halls as me. We didn't have any classes together, but we'd cross paths every now and then in the corridors. There was something unsettling about her, though, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The first time I noticed her staring at me was in the library. I was sitting at a table, minding my own business, when I felt a pair of eyes on me. When I looked up, she was there, sitting a few tables away, staring directly at me. It wasn't the kind of look you get when someone is trying to make eye contact by accident. No, this was deliberate. She was watching me. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was just weird. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing her more and more. It was like she was always around, near my classes, in the cafeteria, even outside my dorm building, always watching. But the strangest part was that she never spoke to me. Not once. She'd just stare, her eyes cold and distant. I started to get paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if she was following me. Things got worse after that. I don't know how else to explain it, but it felt like my life was slowly falling apart. My friends began to drift away from me. At first, I thought it was just the usual university stuff, people growing apart, getting busy with their own schedules. But then they started avoiding me. They wouldn't sit with me in the cafeteria anymore, wouldn't answer my texts, and I even overheard some of them whispering about me, like I'd done something wrong. I couldn't figure out what was happening. It was as if I'd suddenly become invisible, yet everyone was whispering about me behind my back. The worst part was that Clara was still there, still watching, as if she was waiting for something. My grades began to slip, too. I'd never had trouble with school before, but suddenly I couldn't focus. No matter how hard I tried, I'd stare at my textbooks and nothing would stick. I failed 2 exams that semester, which had never happened before. My professors noticed and asked if something was going on, but how could I explain that? I couldn't tell them. I felt like I was being cursed. One night, things escalated. I was walking back to my dorm after a late-night study session when I saw Clara standing outside, under a streetlight. She was waiting for me. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring, with that same cold, distant look on her face. I don't know what made me do it, but I walked toward her. Maybe it was out of frustration. Maybe I just wanted answers. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. She was holding something in her hands, something small, wrapped in cloth. It looked like a doll. "Clara," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "What do you want from me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she took a step forward, holding the doll out toward me. It was crudely made, but it was unmistakable. The doll was me. My hair, my clothes, it was all there. My stomach twisted in knots as I stared at it. "This is your fate," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You will lose everything." I stumbled back, my mind racing. I didn't know what she meant or why she was doing this, but I felt a deep, overwhelming fear. I turned and ran back to my dorm, locking the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her eyes, and that doll. From that point on, my life became a nightmare. My relationships fell apart even more. My closest friend, Mark, accused me of spreading lies about him, something I never did. We got into a huge argument, and just like that, he cut me out of his life. Every day, something new seemed to go wrong. My laptop crashed, deleting an important paper I had been working on for weeks. My phone mysteriously stopped working. My roommate started avoiding me, saying that I gave off bad energy. I started to spiral into a deep depression. Nothing made sense anymore, and Clara's words kept ringing in my ears. Was this really my fate? Had she cursed me somehow? I started missing classes, unable to face the day, afraid of what else might go wrong. In desperation, I turned to my aunt, who was deeply involved in spiritual practices. I told her everything, half expecting her to tell me I was being paranoid. But she didn't. Instead, she told me that it was possible Clara had used black magic against me. She suggested I see a healer to break whatever curse had been placed on me. I was skeptical, but at that point, I had nothing left to lose. I went to the healer, who performed a cleansing ritual. She burned herbs, recited prayers, and made me focus on breaking the negative energy surrounding me. After the ritual, she handed me a small talisman and told me to keep it with me at all times. It took time, but slowly, things began to improve. My grades didn't fully recover, but I passed the semester. Mark and I never spoke again, but I made new friends. And as for Clara, well, I didn't see her again after that night. It was as if she had disappeared. Even now, years later, I still think about that time. I don't know what Clara's motive was or why she targeted me, but I've come to accept that there are things in this world we can't fully understand. I'm not sure if I believe in black magic, but I do know one thing. Clara changed my life in ways I'll never forget.